I really believe that psychoeducation is a right. Um, it's somebody that everybody is rightfully entitled to. People have the right to understand the nature of their own minds and the nature of themselves. So I've always been a very big advocate for psychoeducation because I think education and knowledge is just such a powerful foundational tool to allow one to come to big realizations and to attain broader perceptions of thinking and attain wisdom and insight into the nature of things and themselves. Education is important in the spiritual path, particularly because when you meditate and you grapple directly with the nature of your own mind through direct meditative practices, um, you will start to engage in different altered states of consciousness and you'll begin to perceive reality through different lenses of perception. And sometimes these lenses of perception can disturb us because they are filtering certain elements of truth that maybe make us feel a certain way, such as the truths of our own shadows and the truths of our own subconscious minds. That's why in spirituality we have this dark night of the soul when we come out of our normative perception of seeing reality and we see reality through a different lens of truth. The truth reflects and it comes out and it creates a dark night of the soul where we are forced to confront our shadows, the things that were once hidden, because now light is shining there. Now we are aware of these things. The awareness has been brought into the shadow. So going through the healing journey, psychologically integrating trauma, repressed memories, or sometimes it's not even that deep. Sometimes it's just dealing with any kind of negative stuff. I mean, we all have it. We all have our suffering. We all have our trauma, and it's a very big part of spiritual awakening is to go through a phase where you're forced to deal with that. And having an in-depth knowledge of how that system works, knowing that it's a natural process, having insight into why it happens and, what can be expected in a process like that, having that education can be a very valuable tool to soften the blow of the psychological impact of integration because it can be a very psychologically jarring process. It's not a process of always psychological stability. When big psychological shifts happen in the mind, it creates quakes and shakes, and the soul is and the brain and the mind is not used to change in that way. So change can always feel unstable, but even that feeling of instability is a natural part of the process of psychological change and adjustment, because now you are perceiving reality through a different lens of perception, and it is affecting you on a very philosophical and existential level, and which obviously plays a massive influence on the way we deal with things psychologically and the way we perceive things psychologically. So existential psychology is so important, and philosophy is important as well, because when you realize that, okay, well, I seem to have a certain model of viewing the world, and you study philosophy and say, oh, well, it turns out I'm a little bit more Aristotelian, or I prefer Camus as opposed to Kant or whatever. Um, it kind of gives this, like, again, a structure to fall back on. It's like, okay, well, it's not just some random bullshit in my head that I don't understand. It's actually a thing, and it's called this, and it functions in this way, and that's why education is powerful, and that's why I'm constantly studying, because it's not like, oh well, it's and a lot of tantrics, particularly, like, experience based spiritualists will be like, well, the answer's not in the scriptures. You have to get a first hand experience, and you know I think the reason why I turned to the scriptures is because I was having so much first-hand experience that it got to the point where I didn't really know what was happening. I was like, this is a bit too insane. I'm having these crazy visions, having these fucking moments, having a whole bhakti experience. And it was all well guided, through the lectures of Ramdas and whatever. Like I became obsessed with knowing about what this was. So education's always been a big part of my spiritual scaffolding, if that makes sense. And without the knowledge, man, I would, there were some things that happened to me that I was like, fuck, I don't know what the fuck that was. That was crazy. That was hectic. That was psychologically jarring and disturbing. And it affected me in ways of which changed my ways of thinking, but it didn't always necessarily feel good and comfortable. And, I think having the educational background in psychology and, being a psychology graduate has been probably one of the greatest gifts, because it's just allowed me to navigate this process with at least a little bit of a map book or a little bit of a guide to fall back on. And I have education to thank for that, and I do believe that knowledge is sacred in that way. It serves a sacred purpose. The knowledge is a Dharma tool. Knowledge is a Dharma object. Just like a malabid, just like a mantra, these are Dharma objects. And they are to be revered, and we are to give them respect and appreciation, because it is through these schools of thought, these ways of understanding, these philosophies, these schools, these works of knowledge, that humanity has retained its spiritual memory over thousands and thousands of years. We have scriptures that date back 5,000 years, pointing back to the same revelations that people are having today. And that says something. It means that spirituality is an innate part of the human condition. It is not some social fluke or some psychological trick, or, that a Darwinist might have you like to think. But our innate tendency towards spiritual tendencies suggests, anthropologically at least, that as animals, as living beings, we seem to be orientating towards something. So it's not just this human psychological trick, but it's kind of like this weird, an animal being wise and insightful enough to kind of ponder, what might be out there. Broader way of thinking, a broader way of perceiving, a broader way of conceptualizing. And, the whole psychedelic spiritual experience, the Western medicine is very quick to just diagnose it as a full-on psychosis. But if it is a psychosis, it's collective. And it goes much deeper than just psychosis. It's analyzing dream states, it's analyzing visions. The spiritual scriptures are mostly personal accounts of people's divine experiences. And when you go and read other people's stories, you realize you're not so fucking crazy after all. That there are many other people out there that are having exactly the same experience as you, sometimes even seeing and experiencing the exact same thing as you, going through the same kind of, hero's journey pattern as you, the going through the enlightenment and then the dark night of the soul and then the integration and then coming out wiser, being able to hold both the light and the dark in two hands at once, and eventually finding stability and the middle way. And this path, this spiritual path, seems to be a theme in these visions, these spiritual experiences. So these experiences are definitely themed in some way. They are not the personal, subjective lunacies and mad ravings of individually mad psychotic people trapped in echo chambers of their own psychology. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it is like that. There is severe psychosis, I think, is when it gets to the point where it is that, where you realize, fuck, everything has meaning and everything is completely literal, and you cannot draw meaningful distinctions between importance between different things. And your mind just makes these connections, and it just follows the natural connections of all the things. And it's like, and it can, well, if you've seen somebody in the middle of a psychotic episode, it can be very scary, because you can clearly see that they've lost touch with reality, and it's obvious. And it's like, fuck, it's real. And having to talk somebody down from that psychotic episode is such a delicate process as well, you know. Um, and there's a saying, where you really become enlightened when really wake up and you see and you get a glimpse of that perception of reality from that broad perspective. And there's nothing holy about enlightenment, right? People think enlightenment is all the angels and I'm one with God and it's really, when it's like, it's just knowing the true nature of who you are and what this is. Recognizing, and it's not even knowing or coming to learn, it's just the experiential recognition of what the fuck is really going on, you know? And I think in Trikashaivism, that's really the Pratyabhijna. It's like, hang on now. I see what's going on here. I see what this is. Ha 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 ha. And it's so oof, but it's so hard to put into words. And people have tried to describe it in countless ways, but it is undescribable. The recognition of the brief truth of knowing what this is and having that experience puts things into perspective. It puts things into perspective, man. And it changes the way you see yourself, and it changes the way you see reality. And from that knowledge, from that perspective, we are encouraged to act accordingly, to act wisely, not to fly off the handle, to be in control of ourselves. That's why discipline practices are important. That is why it is important to learn how to take on tapasyas, to learn how to control the body, to put yourself through kind of austerities and tapasya, to take on tapasya. What's the point of tapasya? When you have these experiences, and it can be very intense, you have to have the willpower the willpower to exercise the discretion of how to make the right choices in this life. Because it's very easy for people to fly off the deep side spiritually and say, well, everything's one and there are no consequences and it's just a fucking free for all. And then they go and lose their minds. They go off, they leave their family, they wreck their great family, they leave their job or whatever, and they go and they fuck off and they flee to the mountains. And they try to change their lives and they think taking on that lifestyle will make their lives. And sometimes it does. Sometimes people find great peace in doing that. And I don't think it's a bad thing to do. I just think you really need to ask yourself if that is my path, or am I just trying to escape the suffering of my current situation? Because if you're trying to run away, you don't pass the test, you just delay it. Okay? When you are put in an uncomfortable situation, you are expected to overcome and you are expected to integrate. And that is really the only way that you can develop as a soul, I think, and develop as a consciousness, is through the integration of your own experiences. And as your experiences become altered and super conscious and start expanding into the realm of fucking spirit and whatever, and the astral planes, and you get glimpses of cosmic consciousness, and it blows your fucking mind, you're going to need a sturdy foundation upon which to be able to psychologically hold and conceptualize and integrate that experience, or else it could drive you insane. And that's why they have that saying, that if you become truly enlightened, you either, when you wake up, you either become enlightened or you go insane. And yes, as I said, that on 444, bro. And I think there is an element of truth, and I think to that, because it is the expansion of consciousness, and I think psychosis is the expansion of consciousness. But I think it's the expansion uncontrolled. You know, it's dysfunctional. The restrictive aspect of the mind is out of control, and I think there can be a difference between a spiritual psychosis and a psychological psychosis. Having kind of seen their profiles, the spiritual psychosis kind of follows a very predictable pattern of events that happens. There's usually a breaking of the psyche, usually through years of consumption and building on a knowledge base of a different way of perceiving reality. And eventually, when one can conceptualize the idea of a different reality enough, you can have like a spiritual awakening where you kind of realize, oh fuck, this is actually how things are. And we have these moments all the time, you know, when we learn things growing up, when we realize, oh, so that's how it is. It's that moment. It's, oh, now I understand. Now I fucking get it. It's that moment. That's what enlightenment feels like, really, at its core. I think when it's experienced through cognitively, because you can experience awakening through different mediums, which are really divided up into the four major yogas. You can experience enlightenment enlightenment. Let's use the word union or truth or pratyabhijna or recognition. You can experience it somatically through the body, where you feel like your body becomes one with the universe and you're kind of blissed out and your body is kind of moving and contorting. And, you know, you're in the meditative position, but you're kind of moving around. Experience that through the asanas, all Rajasic yoga, all through action, all through behavior. You can experience a union. Another way is through the medium of the feelings. You can actually feel what it feels like to become one with the universe and to be one with the universe and to realize that there is no separation and it's all just pure love. And it's the divine medium through which all things are created and sustained, is just through this divine love. And that's blissful, man. That's euphoric because it feels so good. And the heart space opens completely and it's just, Sat Chit Ananda. You know, the recognition. And recognition, that Sat Chit Ananda is the combination of three ones. It's the combination of the bliss, recognition of the consciousness, and an intellectual understanding of what's going on throughout the process. And the other is through jnana, it's through the knowledge, coming to realization and union through knowledge, having epiphanies. Okay, that hallmark is epiphany. Oh my word, now I understand. And there's something about epiphany that is blissful. It also carries an element of blissfulness to it. Maybe not as emotionally in depth as bhakti, but there's definitely an emotional way to an epiphany, you know, and there's wonderment, it's excitement, it's different, bro. It's not always sad, you know. I feel bhakti is a little bit more emotional and deep and heart space and teary, and it's a little bit different to revelation. It's a little bit different to the feeling of epiphany. You know, in bhakti, you kind of lose control. There's a bit of a surrender that happens there. And you kind of just give up to the, I suppose, automatic flow of your feelings because, you know, you're not in control of your feelings. Your feelings are just these things that happen. So when you experience unity or bhakti through the feelings, there is this element of surrender. You kind of have to go with the tides, you know. But jnana yoga is very empowering. It feels very mentally empowering and cognitively empowering, and it makes you feel like you understand the world in a way that can infinitely change things for the better. And I had multiple experiences of that realization throughout my teenagehood.